Millionaire humiliates a beggar, laughing at him for being poor, until he discovers that the heavy rain battered the city streets as luxury cars zoomed past a lonely figure standing near a diner. Oliver West, the wealthiest man in the city, stepped out of his gleaming black sports car. His tailored suit was immaculate, his watch worth more than most people's annual salary. But his smirk carried an air of superiority that made him both admired and despised. It was then he spotted the man, disheveled, his clothes torn, and clutching an old coffee cup with trembling hands. Oliver's lip curled in disdain. "How pathetic," he muttered under his breath. He turned to his assistant. "I don't understand why people like him even exist. They're a drain on society." He reached for his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and threw it at the man's feet. The beggar looked up, his tired eyes meeting Oliver's cold, mocking gaze. "You think this makes you better than me?" the man said, his voice soft but steady. Oliver laughed, the sound echoing through the rainy street. "Better? I'm in a different league entirely. Don't get used to handouts." As Oliver walked away, the beggar's whispered words followed him. "You'll soon see that wealth doesn't buy worth." Little did Oliver know, this brief encounter would unravel his life in ways he could never have imagined. Oliver West was the epitome of success, or so he believed. Born into wealth, he had never known struggle or sacrifice. His father, a ruthless real estate tycoon, had taught him one lesson: power and money were everything. By the age of 30, Oliver had built a reputation as a shrewd businessman. His name was synonymous with luxury, his face splashed across magazines, and his penthouse overlooked the entire city. But beneath the polished exterior was a man consumed by arrogance. Oliver saw the world as a hierarchy, and he was perched at the very top. Empathy was a concept foreign to him. He measured people by their bank accounts, not their character. To him, the poor weren't unfortunate. They were failures. That night, after his encounter with the beggar, Oliver hosted a lavish dinner party. The city's elite filled his sprawling mansion, their laughter echoing through the grand hall. Yet Oliver's mind kept drifting back to the man's words. "Wealth doesn't buy worth." "Lost in thought, Oliver," a voice interrupted. It was Marcus, his childhood friend, and one of the few people who dared to challenge him. Oliver smirked, masking his unease. "Just thinking about how some people don't know their place in the world." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Careful, Oliver. Pride comes before the fall." The conversation shifted, but Marcus's words lingered. They annoyed Oliver, yet he dismissed them as meaningless. After all, what could possibly threaten a man like him? Meanwhile, across the city, the beggar sat on a park bench, shielding himself from the rain under a tattered umbrella. His name was Daniel, a man who once had everything but lost it all in a cruel twist of fate. Daniel wasn't just another homeless man. He carried a secret, one that could shatter the illusion of Oliver's perfect life. Back at the mansion, Oliver's assistant approached him with a stack of files. "Sir, the acquisition deal for the downtown property is nearly finalized. All that's left is to clear out the tenants." Oliver waved dismissively. "Make it happen. I want no delays." "But sir, some of the tenants are refusing to leave. I don't care," Oliver snapped. "Offer them double if you must, but I want them gone." Unbeknownst to him, this deal was about to tie his fate to Daniel in ways he could never have foreseen. The threads of their lives, though seemingly worlds apart, were slowly weaving together into a tapestry of revenge, redemption, and revelation. The following week, Oliver was preoccupied with the downtown property acquisition. His assistant had informed him of a particular tenant refusing to vacate, an old man who owned a small, run-down diner. Oliver didn't care about the man's sentimental attachment to the place. To him, it was just another obstacle in his path. "Offer him triple the market value," Oliver instructed during a board meeting. If he still refuses, we'll file for an eviction. As the days passed, the legal pressure mounted on the diner's owner, yet he refused to budge. Frustrated, Oliver decided to visit the property himself. Stepping out of his car in his tailored suit, he walked into the diner with an air of authority. The place was modest, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and homemade pies. Behind the counter stood the owner, a frail but determined man with kind eyes. His name tag read, Daniel. "Are you the owner?" Oliver asked sharply, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. "I am," Daniel replied, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to make you a final offer," Oliver said, sliding a contract across the counter. "Triple the market value. Sign this and you can walk away with more money than you'll ever need." Daniel studied the contract for a moment before looking up. "Do you ever stop to think about the lives you're uprooting?" Oliver smirked. "It's business, nothing personal." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "To you, it's just a building. To me, it's my entire life. My wife and I built this diner from scratch. It's all I have left of her." Oliver rolled his eyes. "Spare me the sob story. Everyone has a past. This is about the future." As Oliver turned to leave, Daniel said something that stopped him in his tracks. "Your father would be ashamed of what you've become." Oliver froze, his fists clenching. He spun around. "What did you say? Did he want revenge, or did he want justice?" As tensions rose, Oliver decided to confront Daniel again. This time he arrived at the diner unannounced, without his usual entourage. The atmosphere inside was tense, the smell of coffee doing little to calm the storm brewing between them. "What do you want now?" Daniel asked, his tone weary but defiant. Oliver hesitated. For the first time, he didn't have a calculated response. "I want to know how you knew my father." Daniel sighed, pulling out an old photograph from behind the counter. It showed a younger version of him shaking hands with Oliver's father. "We were business partners once," Daniel explained. "We started with nothing and built something great. But greed got the better of him. He made a deal behind my back, and when it all fell apart, he left me to take the fall." Oliver stared at the photograph, his chest tightening. "Why didn't you come after him?" "I tried," Daniel said. "But he had power, money, and connections. I had nothing. By the time I cleared my name, it was too late. My reputation was ruined, my wife was gone, and all I had left was this diner." For a moment, Oliver felt something he hadn't felt in years: shame. But instead of admitting it, he lashed out. "So what? You think you're a victim? Life isn't fair. You should have fought harder." Daniel's expression hardened. "You sound just like him." The encounter left Oliver shaken. That night, he couldn't sleep. Memories of his father flooded his mind, memories he had buried long ago. His father had always been a larger-than-life figure, but there were moments when Oliver had glimpsed his flaws. Now, those flaws were staring him in the face, and they weren't just his father's. They were his own. At the same time, Daniel was preparing to make his next move. He contacted a journalist who had been investigating the West family's business dealings. If Oliver wouldn't listen, perhaps public exposure would force him to change. The next morning, as Oliver walked into his office, he found an envelope on his desk. Inside were copies of documents tying his father to the scandal that had destroyed Daniel's life. There was also a note: "The truth will come out, whether you like it or not." Oliver's hands trembled as he read the note. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions, and his father's, crushing down on him. Oliver stared at the documents in disbelief, his mind racing. The evidence was damning: his father's signatures, financial records, and correspondence that proved the West Empire had been built on corruption. It wasn't just Daniel's life that had been destroyed. There were others, countless others, whose names appeared in the files. For the first time in his life, Oliver felt small. The power and wealth he had always prided himself on now felt tainted. The legacy he had been so desperate to protect was nothing more than a house of cards. The note in the envelope haunted him. The truth will come out whether you like it or not. It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. Oliver knew Daniel was behind this, and the thought of his empire crumbling filled him with dread. Determined to confront Daniel, Oliver drove to the diner late that night. The neon sign flickered weakly, and inside, Daniel was sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee as though he had been expecting him. "You've made your point," Oliver said, slamming the envelope onto the table. "What do you want? Money? An apology? What's your endgame?" Daniel looked up, his expression calm but resolute. "This isn't about money, Oliver. It's about accountability. Your father destroyed lives, and now you're following in his footsteps. You have a choice, to be better or to let history repeat itself." Oliver scoffed. "And you think exposing this will change anything? The world doesn't care about morality. It cares about power." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "You're wrong. People care. They may not have the power to fight back, but they remember, and one day, they rise." For a moment, Oliver was speechless. He had spent his entire life believing that power was absolute, that people were disposable. But now, facing Daniel's conviction, he felt something shift within him, a crack in the armor of arrogance he had worn for so long. "You think you're so righteous," Oliver said, his voice trembling. "But revenge doesn't make you a hero." Daniel sighed. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And sometimes justice means holding a mirror up to people like you." The following day, the story broke. The journalist Daniel had contacted published an exposé on the West family's corrupt empire. The article was thorough, backed by irrefutable evidence, and it spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with outrage, demanding accountability from Oliver and his company. At first, Oliver's instincts kicked in: deny, deflect, and distract. His PR team worked overtime to spin the story, but the evidence was too strong. Investors pulled out, stock prices plummeted, and lawsuits began piling up. For days, Oliver locked himself in his penthouse, avoiding calls and emails. The world he had built was collapsing around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But amidst the chaos, he found himself thinking about Daniel's words. You have a choice, to be better or to let history repeat itself. One evening, Oliver returned to the diner, this time without his arrogance. He found Daniel cleaning up after the day's service. "You were right," Oliver said quietly, his voice devoid of its usual bravado. "About everything. My father, me, this whole mess. I've been blind." Daniel studied him for a moment before setting down the rag he was holding. "Admitting that is the first step. I don't know how to fix this," Oliver admitted, "but I want to try." Daniel nodded. "It's not going to be easy. Redemption never is." Oliver spent the next few weeks working with Daniel to rebuild what his father had destroyed. He met with the people who had been affected by his family's greed, listening to their stories and finding ways to make amends. It was humbling, painful, and transformative. Months passed, and Oliver's life looked nothing like it once did. The sprawling office suites, the extravagant parties, and the luxury cars were gone. In their place was something new, something real. For the first time in his life, Oliver felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to wealth or power. He had sold off several of his assets to pay reparations to those his family had wronged. While it barely scratched the surface of the damage done, it was a start. Daniel, initially skeptical of Oliver's motives, began to see a genuine shift in the man he had once despised. One day, as the sun set over the city, Oliver stood outside Daniel's diner, now bustling with customers. It had become a symbol of resilience and community, with Oliver helping Daniel renovate the space and bring it back to life. "You've come a long way," Daniel said, walking up beside him. But this is just the beginning. Oliver nodded. I know. I can't undo the past, but I can choose what kind of man I want to be moving forward. Daniel smiled faintly. It's never too late to change. Just remember, your worth isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. Inside the diner, laughter and conversation filled the air. Oliver looked around, seeing not just a business, but a place where people came together, shared stories, and supported one another. It was a far cry from the hollow grandeur of his former life, but it felt infinitely more meaningful. As he walked out of the diner that evening, Oliver paused, looking up at the night sky. The weight of his father's legacy no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it was a reminder, a lesson in humility, accountability, and the power of choice. The camera pans out, showing Oliver walking down the street, blending into the city he once thought he towered over. His journey of redemption was far from over, but he had taken the first hardest steps. A voiceover delivers the final message. Life doesn't measure us by the wealth we accumulate, but by the impact we leave behind. Oliver West learned this lesson the hard way, but he learned it. What would you do if faced with the same choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below.